Excellent. Okay, hi all, welcome. My name is Dave Javid with Plan to Place. We're here tonight to talk all about housing in San Rafael. And we're really excited to see you here. We're hoping that you've had an opportunity to plug into previous events. We have a full agenda here this evening for you, including opportunities and most importantly, to hear from you all. But before we get started about this housing element update, what we like to do is get our interpretation channels up and running. We have this evening Spanish and Vietnamese available, and I'm going to ask our interpreters to go ahead and read this slide, and then I'll open those channels. So Pablo, we'll start with you, please.
Bueno, bienvenidos a la reunión. Para unirse al canal de interpretación al español, puedes seleccionar el icono de un globo, parece ser un globo terráqueo en este momento, y ahí puede seleccionar usted el idioma preferido que le gustaría oír esta reunión.
Excellent, thank you, Pablo.
Tôi sẽ có thông dịch bằng tiếng Việt. Xin quý vị nhấn vào cái quả địa cầu, dấu hiệu quả địa cầu để chọn ngôn ngữ cho buổi họp. Thí dụ như là quý vị cần tiếng Việt, thì quý vị bấm vào quả địa cầu và bấm vào tiếng Việt, ngôn ngữ Việt, thì quý vị sẽ được nghe bản thông dịch cùng lúc. Cảm ơn quý vị.
Excellent, thank you both. So those two channels are now available. I'm just going to wait 1 second to make sure they're up and that we have those recorded. And just for you all to know as well, we do have the presentations available in both Spanish and Vietnamese, also on the project website at sanrafaelhousing.org. So for those of you that want to grab that and follow along, you're welcome to. So real quickly, just some back of house logistics. We do have closed captioning available if you'd like that option. You do have audio options, obviously, if you called in on your cell phone and or dialed in on your computer. We'll talk here real quickly about how we're going to facilitate the discussion. So you'll notice right now that you don't have access to unmute because we'd like to just make sure that there aren't any accidental interruptions. But once we get to the small group discussions, we definitely want to hear from you all. That's why we're here tonight. So we'll do that through hand raise function. That'll let us know that you'd like to contribute. We'll then unmute you and allow you to contribute that way. We also have the chat box available or chat function available throughout the meeting. So if you did want to chat any questions or comments during the presentation, you're welcome to do so, and we'll hope to get to as many as we can after the presentation, but most likely we'll actually transition those to the actual small group discussion. Again, just to make sure that we have a lively discussion there, and the chat function will also be available there. So just want to let you know those couple things before we get started. And before we jump in, I'm going to now turn it over to Mayor Kate for a welcome.
Thank you, Dave, and welcome everybody. It's nice to be meeting virtually. We wish we could be in person, but we're keeping everybody safe. So if you've been a part of a previous housing meeting, thank you for coming again. And if this is your first one, we are delighted to have you. Really, to have a housing element that reflects our community, we need to hear from our community. So thank you for zooming in tonight and being a part of this conversation. So you're going to hear and get a lot of information tonight. There'll be 4 things. In addition to your input, you're going to learn about the housing element. What is it? What the city is required to do. It's changed a little bit from the last time that we did the housing element. How we plan for the housing that we want that really reflects our community values, and the sites. So that's always an interesting conversation. San Rafael's done a great job of planning for housing sites. We've been doing this for a long time. Housing is important to us. Having said that, the state does have higher requirements this time around, so it's important that we get your input. And you don't need me to tell you that housing is an issue in Marin County. It's an issue in San Rafael, all types of housing, from affordable to market rate. And we always want to balance the different types of housing because we want to continue to have a community that is inclusive, diverse, and representative of the greater world that's out there. We know that housing challenges impact everything from businesses to the city itself, to the policies that the city's working on. All of these are affected by housing. So really, thank you for coming here tonight. And I had these great comments that I I'm kind of going quickly over them, but one part that I really wanted to read, which really captures it, is in San Rafael, we have a strong sense of community here. And we feel really responsible to meet our housing needs. And I'm not going to talk about other cities who might fight it. We actually have been embracing it, and we've embracing it in collaboration and in partnership with our community. And we're committed. At the city, you can see you have incredible consultants and staff tonight helping to have this conversation, but we want to increase, maintain, and improve our housing opportunities for all residents in our community at all income levels. And we're going to balance this with the need to be resilient and sensitive to our changing climate. We're not going to say no because our climate's changing. We're going to say, how do we balance it? So tonight you're going to hear about the sites. We want to see new housing, and we definitely want to hear from you. So with that, I just want to thank you again. This is such an important issue. And in addition to tonight, I hope you stay engaged. So when it comes before the Planning Commission or the Council, you'll call in and continue to be giving input. So thank you, thank you. I will turn it back over to this incredible team and look forward to hearing from all of you. Thanks so much, Dave.
Thank you so much, Mary Kate. That was excellent. And on the screen, you also see the host of folks that are part of this large team to make sure that it's successful. You'll get a chance to interact with everyone you see on the screen here tonight. We're all going to be here to help facilitate the discussion and lead some of the small group exercises, but we just wanted to reference that as well. A fantastic team, as Kate noted earlier, that's a part of this. So now, before we actually get into the presentation, I wanted to just go over the agenda real quick, and then we're going to do a quick poll here together. But obviously, we've been through the introductions. The presentation is really meant to give you an overview of the housing element if you haven't been a part of the meetings before, to give you a sense of what it's all about, what it is, what it isn't, what we've learned thus far from previous conversations as we've gone out in the community, a discussion or an overview about the housing sites or opportunity sites that have been identified. And then ultimately it's developing a plan that works for everyone, right? I mean, this is your plan. This is something that we want to make sure resonates with you. So that will be a key output of this process as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to transition into a small group discussion. We're going to divide you all up evenly and delve in a little bit deeper into some discussion topics that we've identified, and ultimately hear any thoughts, comments, concerns that you all might have. And then we'll do a short report out. So very quickly, we'll have each one of the facilitators identify some of the key themes, and then talk through next steps, and then send you on your way right at 8 o'clock to respect your time. And just one thing to note here, if you did have additional comments, you'll see here on this side, you could send that to housing@cityofsanrafael.org if you had any additional email comments. Okay, so before we get started with the presentation, it's really important for us to know who's here with us this evening. We always do some type of demographic poll. In this case, we're using a fun resource called Mentimeter. So what I'm going to ask you all to do is, if you want to bring up an additional window on your laptop or computer, you can go to menti.com. That's MENTI.com. And then enter this code that will also be on numerous screens as we move through the next few slides. But the code is 55080947. Alternatively, or maybe even more dynamic, is to bring your mobile phone up to the screen and bring your camera up and bring it up to the QR code. And then you can click the button that comes up when you bring your camera there, and it'll take you directly to the site, and you can take this survey on your phone. And no problem if for some reason you can't access this, it'll be available after the meeting for you to go and give us this information too. But we thought we'd do something a little bit more dynamic here today and use this different site. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen for a second. And hopefully you all are taking the time to navigate over to that resource. And then I'm going to bring this back up, put it in presentation mode here, and share my screen again. Okay, so hopefully you all can see that okay, if I'm on the right screen. So this again is the same information I shared before. You either go to menti.com and put in the code 55080947, or you could use this QR code with your mobile device. And this information up top that you see will be on every single subsequent slide, and you could jump back and forth and take any of the questions as we move through it. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started here in the interest of time. So the first question we always like to ask is some type of icebreaker, again, to give you all an opportunity to kind of test out this resource. And this is an opportunity for you to let us know what you love about San Rafael, about San Rafael. So you can type in a few words. I think it's up to 3 words or 4 words, just a quick snippet of what you love about San Rafael. And hopefully, as all goes according to plan, you're going to see some words popping up on the screen here shortly that will then create some type of word cloud depending on how many times a particular word is noted by a participant. So as you see now, folks are identifying that it's sunny, the schools, the downtown, the beauty, the diversity, the rolling hills. This is all fun, great information to have, just again to kind of get our feet wet about how this particular service works. Excellent. Diversity, great. So you'll see the words that pop up bigger are those that came up multiple times for different participants. So diversity, nature, beauty, walkability, downtown. Excellent, excellent. And you'll get access to this again later. We'll share this out, but that was just a fun way to kind of get our feet wet. Now we're going to roll into the demographic questions. Really, these are the standard questions we typically like to ask just to get a sense of who's joining us this evening. The first one being, where do you live? Is it in San Rafael? Is it outside of San Rafael, but in the county? Or is it outside the county altogether? And it looks like, as we would suspect, that the vast majority of you live in San Rafael, which is good to see. And granted, we realize, I think there's about, let's see, maybe 20 people on with us. For those that aren't on, again, no problem at all. We'll have an opportunity to share this information again with you later. And then for those that do work in San Rafael, we're asking, where do you work? Or I'm sorry, or where do you work in general? If you work in San Rafael, if you work outside the county, or if you do not work at all. And great, it looks like about half of those that have replied live in San Rafael, others I'm kind of mixed around the board. Great to see. Thank you for that. And then if you work in San Rafael, I jumped ahead. How long is your commute? Always interesting to kind of note how far folks are traveling for work. To get to work, maybe outside of work, outside of the area. And it looks like we only have a couple responses thus far. Actually, everyone thus far that's responded says less than 20 minutes. So I assume you probably work somewhere in Marin and or from home, which most of us do these days. Next question is, which of the following describes why you decided to attend tonight's workshop? Is it to know more about the housing elements? Is it to know more about obtaining housing in San Rafael? Is it because you support housing or you're concerned about housing? And in this case, you could select as many as apply. It looks like we have some support for housing. Great to see there. Excellent. Next is, what is your current housing situation? Do you own a home? Do you rent a home? Do you live with family and friends? Do you not currently have permanent housing or potentially other? Okay, looks like we have a pretty good mix there. Excellent. Great, thank you for that. Next question is, what type of housing do you live in? Is it a house, duplex, townhome, condo, apartment, accessory dwelling unit, a mobile home potentially, or other? And it looks like split between housing or a home or an apartment. Great, thank you for that response. Next is, with which race or ethnicity do you self-identify? And again, this is an opportunity to select more than one if that applies. Excellent, okay. You all could see the results there on the screen. And one final question before we transition to the presentation is, which bracket best describes your household income? If you prefer to share that information. And again, this is all anonymous, optional, info to share, just to kind of give us a sense again of who's in the room with us. Excellent. Okay. So without any, oh, excellent, more coming in. Great. Thank you all. This is really important information and good information for us to have. And what this also helps us do is recognizing who's here with us, but also equally as important of who isn't, right? So as we go out and do outreach in the community and we'll try to connect with a diverse perspective, this gives us really good information as we move forward, but really, really respect your time and thank you very much for joining us. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing screen and turn it over to Barry to get us started on the presentation. So over to you, Barry. Barry, I think you might be muted.
Yes, I was. Thank you.
Sure.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Barry Miller, the consulting project manager. Oops, I don't want to start at the beginning. Hang on with just a second. And here we are. So we're going to take the next 20 minutes or so to review what the housing element is and why we're doing this, and then go over the sites in San Rafael where housing may be built in the future. But we're going to start with the basics, and some of you may be familiar with this and some of you may be new to this, but in a nutshell, the housing element is a plan to meet our local housing needs. And it's not a new requirement. Cities have been required to do this as part of their general plans for more than 50 years. However, as the mayor said earlier, the requirements have expanded a lot in the last 2 decades. This is the only part of our city's long-range plan that has to be updated on a specific schedule set by the state, in this case, every 8 years. It's also the only part of the general plan that's subject to approval and certification by a state agency. So when we complete the housing element, we have to submit it to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, for certification. Unlike the rest of our city's plans where we set our own course, there are very detailed state requirements for what has to be included in this document. Through the housing element, every city and county in California has to show that they're accommodating what's called their fair share of the region's housing needs. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Every housing element, no matter how large or small the city, has to include these 5 basic parts. First, we look at our housing needs based on data from the census and other sources about population and housing. The needs assessment looks at factors like age, household size, language, employment, income, and family structure, as well as the special needs of seniors, people with disabilities, and those with extremely low income, including unhoused residents. Second, there's an evaluation of our previous housing element focused on the progress we've made implementing the goals and objectives that we adopted last time we did this, which was in 2015. Third, there's an evaluation of constraints to housing development. This includes government constraints like our zoning rules and permitting fees, and non-government constraints like the cost of building materials or rising interest rates. Fourth, there's an evaluation of resources. This includes land, in other words, sites where housing can be built, and financial resources like tax credits and grants that can be used to help build housing. Finally, we're required to evaluate fair housing practices, including lending patterns, evictions, fair housing referrals, and so on, to make sure that our policies support a more inclusive community. And all of these analyses feed into the plan itself, which includes a set of goals, policies, and programs for the next 8 years. In addition to those 5 basic parts, we're required to affirmatively further fair housing. The acronym that we use for that is AFFH. And what this means is that we are required by state law to address significant disparities in housing needs and access to opportunities, replace segregated living patterns with integrated and balanced living patterns, transform racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, foster and maintain compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. These are all new requirements that were passed by the state legislature in 2017 for housing elements. Essentially, we need to apply an equity lens to this whole process. That means we need to include policies and programs that address disparities, include a robust community engagement and outreach program that reaches all of our residents, especially those with the greatest housing needs. It also means we need to plan for affordable housing throughout the city and not just in the places where it's concentrated today. We started our outreach and engagement process about 8 months ago. The City Council appointed a 13-member housing element working group last November, and that group has been meeting monthly to discuss housing issues and policies. There have also been a number of meetings and presentations to different groups and organizations to inform and gain insight into the needs of people who work or live in San Rafael. Moving forward, we'll be collaborating with our community to convene focus groups with residents who haven't historically participated in these discussions. This includes extremely low income residents at risk of losing their housing and people who work here but commute from other communities. Right now, we're about 2/3 of the way through this process. Work on the housing element began last fall. A lot of the initial work was collecting and analyzing data related to our housing needs and our existing programs. In the spring, we completed a comprehensive analysis of our zoning regulations and permitting procedures, as well as an inventory of sites where housing could be built. We also started developing new policies and programs looking at ways to increase housing and better meet the community's needs. What we're doing now is putting together a draft document that sums it all up. That'll be submitted to the state of California in early fall as a working draft. And once we get comments back from the state, we'll be revising the document and bringing it to the Planning Commission and City Council for adoption. So how much housing are we actually planning for? This is actually not something that we get to decide. In this case, the housing element responds to an assignment that comes to us from the state of California and the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG. Here's how it works. The state determines the number of housing units that need to be built in each region of California to meet expected needs over an 8-year period. The state determined that the 9-county Bay Area needs 441,176 units by 2031. It's then up to the Regional Council of Governments, which is ABAG in the Bay Area's case, to assign those units to individual cities and counties. This process is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA for short. And the units are assigned based on things like population, employment, transit, and access to resources. So ABAG assigned 13,572 units, or about 3% of the total for the entire Bay Area, to Marin County. A little less than 1% of the regional total was assigned to San Rafael. Now, less than 1% may sound small, but it's still equal to 3,220 units, which is about 3 times the assignment we had in the last housing element cycle. But there's more to this assignment than just a big number. This is 3,220 units are broken down by income. We can't just plan for 3,220 single-family detached $2 million homes. 1,349 of those units, or about 42% of the total, need to be affordable to low and very low income households. To demonstrate that we've planned for these more affordable units, we need to designate land for multifamily housing as well as single family housing. And you can see on this slide how those income ranges are defined in Marin County. So a household of 4 earning between $91,350 and $146,350 would be considered low income, and so on. You can see the numbers here on the slide. The income numbers ranged, they vary depending on the number of people in the household, and they vary from county to county across California. So what's low income in Marin County is not the same as what's low income in Contra Costa or Sonoma counties, and so on. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the city itself is not required to build 3,220 units of housing. This is primarily a capacity exercise. We need to basically demonstrate to the state that we have the physical capacity, the zoned capacity for 3,220 units, and we've done what we can as a local government to remove obstacles to construction. Ultimately, it's up to the private market to build the housing. So this slide highlights some of the findings of the housing needs assessment. This is one of those buckets that you saw in the earlier slide showing the components of the element. So here's some San Rafael trivia that some of you may be able to use at parties. Between 2010 and 2020, San Rafael gained 3,500 residents. That's 36% of Marin County's population growth over the 10-year period. But we only added 400 units of housing. So our population grew at a rate that was 9 times faster than our housing stock grew. What that means is that as our households got larger, more households became overcrowded. So between 2010 and 2020, the percentage of San Rafael renters living in housing that's considered overcrowded by the census increased from 12% to 21% of the total. Our age profile is shifting. The fastest growing age group in the city are 65 to 74-year-olds. These are the early baby boomers. There are more than 2,200 people in this age group in San Rafael than there were 10 years ago now. We're also seeing a growth in our school age population with 1,900 more kids in the city today than we had just 10 years ago. On the other hand, the number of 25 to 44-year-olds has dropped by 1,800, at least in part due to the lack of affordable places to live in the city. We're becoming a more racially and ethnically diverse city. In 2020, 55% of the city's residents identified as non-white. The percentage of Latino residents was 34%, and half of the city's children spoke more than one language in 2020. We have an almost even split between renters and owners in the city, with each group representing half of our households. 1 out of 3 San Rafael households is a single person living alone, and half of those single person households are a person over 65 living alone. We also have more and more households that are considered cost burdened, and what that means is they spend a large percentage of their income on housing. Nearly 30% of San Rafael's renters are spending over half of their household income on housing. And when we break this data down by neighborhood or geography, we see some stark differences from one part of San Rafael to another. We also see big differences between our racial and ethnic groups. For example, 64% of the city's white households are homeowners, while only 14% of the city's Latino households and 15% of the city's Black households are homeowners. As you can see on this map, the Canal neighborhood has been identified by the state of California as an area of high segregation and poverty, while nearby neighborhoods are considered to have moderate or high resources. And when we look at maps of income, home ownership, overcrowding, and other factors, we see the same pattern. So let's now move to the housing sites, which is really the focus of tonight's conversation. And thank you for listening to the information about housing needs, because that really helps inform the conversation about housing sites. So remember, our task is to identify specific locations in San Rafael where we can accommodate 3,220 units of housing. The state has given us some rules about how we go about doing that, and those are highlighted here on the slide. First, we need to show the income group that each site that we identify can realistically support. So if we call a site out as suitable for lower income housing, it has to be zoned for at least 30 units per acre, which basically means it has to be multifamily housing, and the lower income sites have to be at least 1/2 acre in size. There are also specific rules that apply to any sites that we counted in our housing element 8 years ago. Again, we do this every 8 years. So there are sites that we counted in 2015, many of which we're carrying forward. We can also count accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, but we have to be realistic about how many we think are going to be built. We can count projects that are approved but not built yet, and we can count sites that are non-vacant as long as we have substantial evidence that they can be realistically developed in the next 8 years. And we do have some good examples of this in San Rafael. A lot of the housing we've seen built in the city in the last 20 years is on sites that used to be something else. We also have to be realistic, meaning we can't just assume that every property is going to develop with the maximum number of units allowed. And finally, we need to provide a buffer of extra sites in case some of the sites we identify become unavailable over the 8-year period. So that 3,220 units ends up looking more like 4,000 units by the time you add in that buffer. So San Rafael has its own guidelines for how and where housing's built, and that's our general plan update. And these are in addition to the state guidelines. We went through a three-year process to develop a general plan update from 2018 to 2020. And this is our long-range plan for growth. And if you look at that plan, you'll see it provides clear direction to focus our development in downtown on older commercial sites and in ways that respect the context of older neighborhoods. You can see in the general plan also where we don't want to locate housing, such as on our hillside and open space lands, in hazardous and flood-prone areas, and in some of our industrial areas. So these essentially are guiding principles, and we want to stick to these principles for where our housing sites should be, including creating a more equitable city. So here's our challenge in a nutshell. We have to balance those state requirements. We have to balance the plan for 3,220 units, and we have to meet our own guiding principles to provide realistic opportunities for persons of all incomes across the entire city. So here's the good news, is that we can do it. We can do it without making major changes to our zoning or our general plan. We don't need to develop in our open spaces. We are a relatively large city of almost 17 square miles with a significant amount of vacant and underutilized land that can be repurposed or reused in the next 8 years. We've actually identified the capacity for about 5,000 units of housing in this process, and we're going to walk you through where that capacity is located in the next few slides. Again, this is a numeric exercise that shows the state of California that we have capacity to meet our assignment. Beyond that, we still have to set our own housing policies and programs through this process. This is just one aspect of the housing element. It's not the only aspect. And we still face challenges to achieving that number. Just because we've identified these sites on a map does not mean that they're going to develop. Some of the sites are small, some have multiple owners, some would be expensive to build on. They may have property owners who are not particularly interested in developing right now. Also, a lot of the need that's been assigned to us is for affordable housing. In other words, we can't only build above moderate income homes and condos. We also need affordable apartments, and building that type of housing depends on state and federal funding sources and tax credits that are in short supply. There are also places in the city where it's more difficult or even unwise to build housing due to conditions like wildfire hazards, flooding, or fire danger. And we also have infrastructure constraints like water supply, limited transit, and roads in need of maintenance, and so on. We also have a lot of approved development in the city, most of which is market rate housing, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So I'm going to walk you through the different categories of our housing opportunity sites. And as was mentioned in the breakout groups, we'll have some opportunity to talk about the sites if there are any specific questions. So the first category of sites are projects that are already approved. These are projects that have already received the approvals they need for construction. We're expecting that they'll be built by 2031. Together, these projects represent almost 800 housing units. They include projects like the 67-unit affordable senior housing development. This is Vivalon on 3rd Street in downtown San Rafael, and the 192-unit Los Gamos apartments that were approved earlier this year. Once these projects are built, they'll actually meet 31% of our above moderate and moderate income assignment and about 15% of our lower income assignment. Next, we have proposed projects. These are projects that have not been approved yet, but we do have applications in that are under consideration for approximately 1,300 units of housing. A lot of this capacity is at Northgate Mall, which is proposed for redevelopment in several phases. The first of these phases includes about 900 units, and it's scheduled to be finished by the end of the 8-year planning period. In other words, 2031. It includes 96 affordable units and over 800 market rate units. So between the approved projects and the proposed projects, we're already up to 2,100 units of our 3,220 assignment. But again, as you can see on the slide, most of that housing is above moderate, and we're still at only 24% of our lower income need. So where else can housing be built in San Rafael, ideally without changing the zoning? So we looked at vacant land zoned for low and medium density residential development and identified about 60 sites in the city that are vacant and have residential zoning. But these sites only have the capacity for about 250 units. And again, we're not proposing any rezoning on these properties. They're mostly small sites that are zoned for only 1 or 2 single family homes, and many of them have steep slopes or limited access. So we would not expect to see affordable units in that context. You can see an example on the slide of one of the larger sites, which is on Windward Way off of Bellum Boulevard over in the canal area. And there really aren't that many sites like this left in San Rafael. Next, we have sites that are zoned for high density housing. And by high density, we're talking sites that are zoned for more than 30 units per acre, which is roughly equivalent to a 3-story apartment building. We've identified about 20 sites in this category with a capacity of about 500 units. One thing to note, many of these sites are not vacant, and you can see 2 examples in the photos on the slide. These happen to be older motels on Lincoln Avenue that are zoned for multifamily housing. There are also some church and surplus school properties in this category, as well as several properties that are underdeveloped. The next category is commercially zoned property where housing is allowed. And San Rafael does allow multifamily housing in most of our commercial zones. There are a few sites where we think conditions are good for housing in the next 8 years. There are 29 sites in this category, and about 7 of them, actually 7 of them, were identified in the last housing element in 2015. If you take all these sites together, they have the capacity for a little over 1,100 units. And that includes a significant number that could be affordable units. You see an example of one of the housing sites here. This one happens to be carried over from the previous housing element. It's the Harbor Shopping Center on Francisco Boulevard East, in between the Lexus and Subaru dealerships. Many of the housing sites in this category are not vacant. So you may ask, how do you know when a site is a good candidate? Why did you pick this site and not another site like this? And I'll say it's not an arbitrary process. We do identify the sites based on measurable data about whether the property is for sale, whether the building is empty, what the vacancy rate is, what the value of the building is relative to the land, what the age of the building is, how extensively the site is used compared to what's allowed by zoning. So if you have a site that's a big parking lot or an empty retail store or empty office, those are the sites that we're looking at in this process. Here are a few more examples. These are 2 self-storage facilities in North San Rafael. So just for orientation, that's US 101 at the top of the slide. So we're sort of looking to the east here. This is the Civic Center Smart Station. Northgate Mall is just off the screen over here. The Civic Center is just over here. The thing about these 2 sites is they do have self-storage facilities, both of them do, but they present an opportunity for transit-oriented development that would enable residents to maybe use the train for some of their travel trips and be a little less dependent on private cars. Between these 2 properties, just as an example, there's the potential for about 100 units. These are particularly good sites for more affordable units because they provide an opportunity to lower transportation costs as well as housing costs. Here are a few more examples. And again, we identified 29 sites in this category, which is more than we can highlight in this slideshow. But we wanted to just give you a few more examples of the kinds of sites that are under consideration. So on the left, you see a branch bank on Smith Branch Road near the freeway, which has been closed since shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic started. In the middle is a vacant office building on Las Galinas behind the Safeway on Freitas Parkway. On the right, there's an older neighborhood market on Woodland Avenue in the breakout groups, in the Bret Harte neighborhood. And in the breakout groups, we'd love for you to share with us any sites that may be in your own neighborhoods or that you may think of where multifamily housing might make sense in the next 8 years. So we have another category for downtown sites, and this diagram that you see on the screen was done about 3 years ago. It came out of a study for all downtown properties that was specifically focused on where housing might be built. And last year, the city adopted a new plan for downtown San Rafael that makes it easier to build housing in this area. That's an important goal of the city's general plan. So just for orientation, we're looking at an area on this map This is where 2nd and 4th Street meet on the far left of the screen. Here's the Montecito Shopping Center and San Rafael High School. On the far right of the screen, you can see the freeway running through the middle. City Hall is over here. And some examples from this area are going to come up on just the next slide, but I wanted to mention we've identified about 50 sites in this area with the potential for 1,500 units. Again, that doesn't mean 1,500 units will be built. It's a capacity study showing where housing could potentially be built. Some examples would be the municipal parking lot on 3rd and Seahouse. This is the green roof of Soul Food, or the green side of Soul Food right here. It's the city parking lot. This is the Ace Garden Center on 4th Street in the West End Village. Both of these sites could potentially be housing in the future, housing above parking, housing above retail. A number of opportunities like this exist in downtown. We did want to take a moment to talk about the sites we haven't included in our inventory. We did look at these areas and identified a number of sites that could be considered. Some may be considered in the next housing element when we get to 2031. But I just wanted to mention, we're not really looking at industrial areas in this process. And we know there are sites in those areas that may be vacant or underutilized, but many may not be well situated for housing because of the noise and dust and odors and other effects that go with industrial uses. We also want to keep those industrial areas for jobs, businesses, and essential services. We generally didn't consider active, fully occupied big box shopping centers, like we're talking places like Staples, Best Buy, Target, and so forth. Again, these centers generate revenue for the city. They provide jobs and services, and in some cases, they're not well connected to existing neighborhoods. We didn't count most of the car dealerships because we have city policies that support saving these sites for business and economic development. We counted some of the older office buildings where they were mostly vacant, including those built in the 50s and 60s and so forth, but generally not the Class A or the larger corporate offices that were built in the 80s and 90s. We also avoided sites that were already developed with multifamily housing, in part because we want to build in places without losing existing housing units. And we focused on sites that already have the zoning in place to accommodate housing. So we didn't really look at open space areas or wetland areas or areas that would require general plan amendments. We're going to just take a moment to look at accessory dwelling units. These are our in-law apartments, our garage apartments, backyard cottages, and so forth that you might find in almost every San Rafael neighborhood. There are new laws at the state level that make it much easier to build ADUs in our residential areas. They are relatively affordable because they cost less to build than conventional apartments, and they're family owned. So part of this process involves estimating how many ADUs we think we're going to be able to build in the next 8 years and what they'll rent for. So San Rafael has seen about 20 ADUs a year for the last 3 or 4 years. We're projecting a slight uptick to about 25 per year for the next 8 years, which gets us another 200 units. And we're projecting that about 35% of those ADUs will be affordable to lower income households by design. And that's based on rent data for cities throughout the Bay Area. About 35% of the in-law units that we're seeing built now are either rented at low enough costs or they're occupied by family members or others at costs that would make them considered lower income in terms of the rents that are charged. So where does this leave us? Here's the summary table, and we have about 180 sites, again, with the potential for over 5,000 units. If you look at the brown row in this table, you see we have the capacity for 1,700 over 1,700 lower income units, 700 moderate income, nearly 3,000 above moderate income, including 1,600 that are already in the pipeline. And so we do find ourselves in a better position than some of the communities in Marin right now that have to rezone property to meet their assignments. But as I mentioned, identifying sites on a map and getting housing built are two entirely different things. So we also need to keep that in mind, and the state mandate to make sure that we're distributing our housing opportunities fairly across the entire city. So before we close the presentation, and these are the last couple of slides here, we just want to walk you through a few maps showing where our housing sites are located. These maps are online at sanrafaelhousing.org, and there's a spreadsheet that tells you what the capacity of each of these sites are and gives you some more background information. Here we're looking at North San Rafael. You can see Northgate Mall in the center, lower center of the slide, Lucas Valley Road up at the top, Civic Center down at the bottom. The colors on this map indicate the general plan designation for the sites. So the brown sites are zoned for multifamily housing or higher density housing. The red sites are zoned for commercial, the blue sites for office use, and so on. So this is the North San Rafael area. And we're now moving south. This is I know there's not really a place name called Mid San Rafael, but just in terms of where we are on the map, again, the Civic Center is in the northern part of this map. This is just above the northern edge of downtown. So you can see Lincoln Hill, Dominican, Sun Valley, and Fair Hills here, and then Rafael Meadows. So you can see some of the housing sites available in this area. There are some sites in the Marydale area and so forth. This is the San Pedro Peninsula, a few sites along the Point San Pedro Road corridor. This is the lower part of Glenwood Elementary School, for example. And now we're going to move on to the southern and central part of San Rafael. This is, again, a wider range of sites in this area, and we have a close-up of downtown on the next slide. There are a few parcels you can see here on the Miracle Mile, a few parcels on Woodland, a few parcels over in the Medway and Canal, Bellum, Kerner area, but primarily most of what you see on this map is in downtown San Rafael. So here's a map of downtown San Rafael. Those pink sites are all of the housing opportunity sites that have been identified. Some of them include properties around the SMART station, the old Salute restaurant, for example, some of the municipal parking lots, the B Street Safeway, some of the properties that are already in the pipeline are shown here. Many of the city's municipal lots are shown. And the intent here is not to eliminate downtown parking, it's to recognize an air rights opportunity to build housing above existing parking that's publicly owned land, city land, which presents some of the best opportunities for affordable housing. So I've said this several times in the presentation. We know all of these sites are not going to develop. This is an inventory of places where housing could be built, and we're really looking forward to your feedback on what we've just presented. And I apologize for the long length of the presentation. We are excited to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Barry. And now we're about to transition to the most important part of this evening's workshop, is to hear from you all. I'm going to share screen here real quick. I just want to know, we did see a couple questions come in through chat that we could definitely talk about and address as we get into the small group. So thank you for that. So what we're going to actually move into now is these small groups that you'll magically transition into once I click the button here. And we're going to discuss these three questions and any others that you all might have for about the next half hour or so before we come back together to do a quick report out. So the questions we'd like to ask is, have you faced housing challenges in San Rafael? And we're going to ask that question maybe in a couple of different ways to understand what some of those critical issues might be. Also maybe what type of housing you'd like to see in San Rafael. And then based on the presentation you just saw that Barry provided, are there any questions or concerns about the sites, that have been identified? And we can speak to that. And then just any other things just generally about housing throughout the city that you would like to discuss. A great opportunity here, as there will be others in the future, but just to give you the space to provide us input. And then if there's time, we're going to ask one other question about other ideas you all might have to for outreach to make sure that, again, we're reaching multiple perspectives as we navigate this process. And just as a reminder, we're going to do the discussion through hand raise just to make sure folks don't accidentally speak over each other, or you can drop in your comments in the chat function in the chat window, and you'll see all of that appear on a virtual page that the facilitator will bring up on the screen so that you can have a great facilitated discussion together. And then again, we'll come back here and do a quick report out and then send you on your way at 8. So unless there's any other questions, we are going to have our interpreters in the main room, both in Vietnamese and Spanish. We've also created one room for some Spanish speakers that we are aware of, but you're welcome to go there as well if you wanted the discussion or facilitated primarily in Spanish. And I might do a quick hand raise for those that are possibly following along the Spanish channel. If you would like to be moved into a room that will be facilitated solely in Spanish, if you could please use the hand raise function now. And if for some reason I don't see you, you can always come back to this main room and we could transport you there. Great, thank you, Carla. We'll make sure that you are in that room. Great, so with that, thank you, Ariella, we'll make sure you're in that room as well. And Darlene, perfect, thank you so much. So with that, let me just double check as what typically happens, and thank you so much all again for your time. As soon as I say small groups, we lose about 10% of folks, but I think most of you hung on with us and we really, really appreciate your time and hope that you do. I'm gonna go ahead and mix things up here real quick. I think we're in good shape, great. I'm gonna go ahead and open rooms. Facilitators, note takers are gonna be transported to your appropriate rooms. Others will kind of help to be resources in rooms as well, and we'll get started with the discussion. So we look forward to seeing you back here shortly. Have fun. And then Leslie, I'll go ahead and stop sharing so that you can use this room for facilitation. Over to you. And just to let you know, Leslie, you have Liz as a resource now in this room with you as needed.
Okay.
And if you need help sharing screen at all, Rachel, I'm sure you could bring it up too, so just keep us posted there.
I can share the screen. I'm not sure about the mute capacity.
You know, I think you have a small enough room where you could still ask folks to use the hand raised, and they should be able to, if they can't unmute themselves, I could change that function now so they can. There we go. Folks should be able to unmute themselves now if that's easier for you to facilitate that way.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I am Leslie Mendez, and I'm here as staff today, but I am also the planning manager for the city of San Rafael. And you have met Dave David, but we are also here with Rachel. Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself very quickly?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel, and I'm here with Plan to Place, part of the consultant team, and I will be taking notes. So looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks for being here.
Rachel, can I ask you to share your screen? Because when I share my screen, I can't see the participants anymore.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
That would be great. Maybe I'm not doing it correctly.
And just Dave, you might have to give me capacity to share my screen.
Oh, let me do that.
Or,
1 second.
or yeah, someone. Thanks.
You should have it now.
Thank you. All right. So again, thank you for being here. We have 4 specific topics that we would like you to focus on, and we are also willing to take any other comments that you have and or questions you have about housing, the housing element process, or any other thoughts or suggestions. We will, if we cannot answer your question directly, and Barry, well, he's in our room now, but if he gets called out to another room, we will get back to you and be sure to address all comments and questions. So, so with that, I think we won't, do you all have the ability to unmute yourself? I certainly hope so. Yes, excellent. Okay, so I think we're a small enough group that we can just take turns. So the first question that we have is, what do you think are the most critical housing issues in San Rafael and why? And have you faced housing challenges in San Rafael? I would also expand that. Do you know someone who's faced housing challenges in San Rafael? Amy?
Well, just the basics, start with safe housing, affordable housing, enough green spaces for families to enjoy. And I actually would extend this, I think you know this, but I'm always very focused on any development being humanely designed so that people aren't packed together, but they actually have space enough to live comfortably, and also courtyards or green spaces so that people have some dignity and are able to be outside. Design that it allows them to enjoy the out of doors. I also think walking distance to or accessibility to school is important for families, and to shopping, food shopping particularly. Affordable as much as it can be, food shopping.
I'd like to tag on to what Amy said about, if I could, about the safety aspect.
Yes, please.
The infrastructure of some of the places that we see, there's the wildfire safety and evacuation safety, which is very limiting in a lot of the accessibility and roadways and traffic. And so that's a big concern. And that kind of dovetails into the whole infrastructure issue about not only placement and accessibility, but also things like fire, water, and I come from the education background, so schools and being able to support the addition. And then I had one question though about when Barry was breaking down the numbers, affordability, low income, very low income. Are they taking into account the in lieu of fees that developers can pay, so they don't necessarily have to meet those numbers, but they can pay a dollar amount into the kitty to say, hey, I'm not going to build the low income, I'm going to build the medium income, but I'm going to pay this amount to this fund that will supposedly fund low income down the road? Are those numbers solid of this is what has to be developed, or can they pay those in lieu of funds? Do you know?
So Barry, do you want to answer since you're here? Oh, I think you're on mute. I'll answer and you can tell me if I'm wrong. The numbers that we have to provide are the actual numbers, well, that we need to meet our allocation are the actual numbers built. So when you see our progress, it is the numbers built. So the city does allow an in lieu fee, which goes to the Housing Trust Fund with the goal of leveraging that money to, apply to affordable housing developments to hopefully get a higher percentage in the long run of lower affordable units. So, but the numbers that you see are purely based on building permits pulled for housing units constructed. And if, Barry, if you have anything to add, or if I was completely off base, you can wave your hands if you still have your mute on.
I can speak next if you want.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Charlie, and I work in the housing industry, oddly enough. There's absolutely no 2 or 3 ways around it. It is all about affordability. I mean, the lack of affordable housing is destroying the ability of any of us to run a business in San Rafael, much less Marin, much less California. I'm an architect myself, and I have completely given up on ever hiring a young person to work in my San Rafael office. Our San Rafael office is down to me, and I'm getting close to retirement, and another guy who is at retirement age, but is still working, and he'll be retired soon. And a couple more people who are all over the age of 50. The only way I can hire somebody under the age of 50 in my field is to give them an office to go to in Arizona or somewhere in Southern California. So it's just unsustainable. It's a crisis. It's destroying our economy, and it's ultimately going to destroy our city, because the only people who will be living here, are either very wealthy individuals who are lucky enough to own a home, as I do, and everybody else who will be, continuing this trend that we're already seeing of overcrowding the little bit of rental housing we have. So it's all about volume. It's all about affordability. I personally believe that the right answer from a design perspective that delivers some of the goals that we just heard about is to take advantage of the underutilized infrastructure of our downtown and build at whatever density we can in the downtown, because that will serve another purpose and provide more residents and more activity on 4th Street, and quote unquote activate that space, activate our downtown, which is never a bad thing, and is a battle that's being fought for a long time. So yeah, to me, it's all about affordability and reuse of existing infrastructure so that we have sustainable, appropriate development.
Thank you, Charles. Anyone else on this topic?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hi.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Susan Adler, and I live on Laurel Place, and I've lived here for 28 years. And my question is this: what about is the city actively perhaps thinking to identify locations that have been designated for another development, say like the corner of Mission and Lincoln, the Aegis facility? The site has sat vacant, for years. It is still vacant with no signs of, progress in terms of constructing the Aegis facility. And, to Charles's point, I mean, if that were to be developed into housing, that could bring, a mixture of market level and affordable. You've got a school nearby, you've got access to downtown. I mean, is there some sort of process to review projects that have been approved that for whatever reason might be stalled or, not coming to fruition? And how do we handle those spaces?
Yeah, so I'll just answer quickly, which is that each land use entitlement does have an expiration period.
Okay.
It's valid for a period of 2 years. And so the Aegis facility actually came in the summer and did a modification to the program.
Okay.
So we've had, because of the economics, we've had quite a few pre-approved developments come back for modifications to extend their period. So, but if the permit is expired, it is open. It's on the market for
that seems like a
someone else to move forward.
Access to public transportation, a small local public school, access to downtown, to restaurants and shopping, things like that. I mean, it's probably is like, will the city actively work to review those locations? So they will.
Yes. So
and I agree with Amy's point that we need to have a thoughtfully designed housing. It can't just be cement in a room. We have to have green space. We have to have walkability, shoppability, and also what about using materials that are more environmentally friendly? I mean, sustainability is really important right now, especially in San Rafael, where we seem to be really cutting down quite a few trees for obvious reasons, the fire danger, but we are the tree city, and it seems that we should, work to kind of keep our environmental impact to a minimum and enhance green space if we could, along with providing more housing.
Thank you, Susan.
And then are the pink spaces that are identified on the map, are those just identified only? There's no projects necessarily being.
So again, yes, if you're looking at the opportunity sites, those are identified. They may have some housing on them, but it would be for more intensification of housing. They have the ability to provide more than they're currently providing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. This is very helpful. Give input. I think, you know, there's one site I was thinking about was the former gym in downtown 4th Street. I don't know whether that's part of the downtown. That's part of it. And then I was asking maybe the bowling alley, that's not through planning yet, to see if that's another option for us. And CCA is still looking at, I mean, Canal Community Alliance is still looking at a possibility in the canal, I know. So, and of course, if we can provide sites away from the canal would be very helpful, that are low income and certainly quite a bit lower than 91,000 per year for a family of 4. That's, you know, 60,000, 70,000 maybe for a family of 4, but that we need to consider those amounts because people work 2 jobs, maybe they can get up to 70,000 or something like that. With their families, you know, we are crowded in the canal, and anything we can do to release that crowdedness is very important, and put people in areas with a moderate and home ownership kind of thing. We really need to do that. Of course, ADUs were a possibility, 25, yeah, as much as possible, and make it easier for people to do ADUs. That would bring people, that are working people, to actually live and work in an area where they're working. That would be very helpful. I think we need to move on that too. So those are some of the comments I would have. Thank you.
Thank you. And you kind of touched on some of our next questions, and I know we have a limited amount of time, so we'll switch to the next question. But if you haven't spoke about the first question, we have 4 questions, so we just want to hear everything you have to say. So don't feel limited to this. So you did bring up something about different sites, and so I wanted to segue into, do you have any questions and concerns about the sites? And just for the record, the bowling alley, 88 Vivian, there was a 70 dwelling unit, residential unit project that was approved by the Planning Commission in May. So we do have a project approved. Now we just have to get it built. So, so the question as to whether you do have any questions or concerns about the opportunity sites that were selected, or that either concerns about the ones that were selected or ones that may have been left off. And I think you mentioned the former gym on 4th Street, did you say, Johnson?
Yeah, the former gym on 4th Street. I don't know whether that's
okay.
And about parking lots, I don't know, that's kind of hard to do. It maybe costs a lot of money to do that. I don't know. That's
Jesus.
I think each site would have such specific, you know, you'd have such specific concerns based on the location. But one thing that I think of immediately with the canal as a very, you know, real concern is the fact that it is cut off effectively from the city. You know, you've got this fabulous bike lane on the other side and access to the SMART train. But how do people that live and work in the canal get from the canal to integrate into downtown San Rafael? The public transportation isn't efficient. So perhaps, you know, most are using cars, but it seems to me that if we were going to develop that area, which I think we should, and provide housing, wouldn't we want to also at the same time work on the infrastructure to include a walkable, bikeable, safe way for residents there to come into downtown San Rafael? I don't know, I could be wrong. I just don't think there's any way for people to walk safely or bike safely from the canal.
Thank you for that. Anyone else with any comment on the actual sites selected or not selected?
Come on.
Mark?
I think it's useful to just realize that San Rafael is a virtually built out community. I mean, most of the developable sites are developed. That was pointed out earlier in the presentation. I think everybody that's in our little group here is well aware of that. So really, this is all about trying to extract the maximum utility. And by that, I mean the maximum amount of units that can be fit onto the few sites that we have left that are practical to develop. I am an architect. I can assure you that, you know, the creativity that we bring to all of these projects, even when there's a limited budget, is capable of producing quality projects and quality places for people to live. I'll grant you that multifamily, the most common prototype of that we see around today is, you know, generally, you know, 3 to 5 story wood framed buildings that can appear pretty boxy. But those are the economically sustainable development models that we have today. Those are energy efficient, those are sustainable. And, you know, they can provide very fine quality units, you know, with some balconies and things like that. It's just, we have to be realistic about this and understand that we are trying to extract the maximum utility from these few sites that are left, and that on-site open space requirements that are contained in the zoning are a real problem, and that, you know, to properly get the unit counts that we need, we have to rely, I think, on, you know, the many open spaces that we have to take advantage of here in our community, rather than requiring it automatically on site, which will reduce the density greatly.
Thank you for that. And Bob, I know you had your hand up, and we had a concern that we weren't getting through all the questions, which is slightly true, but some of these are bleeding over into the other, so I didn't want to cut off the conversation. So I'm going to go through the next 2 questions because we are running out of time. We had a little more limited time than we initially anticipated. So question 3 is what other things should the city be thinking about when it comes to housing? And question 4 is outreach. If you have any other suggestions for how we might solicit additional feedback on the housing element update and encourage participation. So Mark, thank you for your comment. So we'll go to Bob, and then hopefully Mark, you can comment on one. It could bleed over to all 4. We'd just love to hear your comments. Bob?
I was really just going to second what Charles said, and I'll be real brief. I wouldn't agree that we're near capacity, because the real solution is heightened density. With heightened density, we can create many more opportunities. And I certainly strongly agree with the other thing he said, that our number 1 problem is affordability. I think the number 2 problem is segregation. I think it's important to pick sites so that we can maximize integration and opportunity throughout the community. I think there's a lot to be said for thinking about heightened density in my neighborhood, North San Rafael. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Mark, did you have some comments?
Yeah, I'm concerned about I know we have a housing problem. I think the accessory dwelling units is a creative idea, but have the people that are doing this housing element considered what the parking effects are going to be? Some of you have heard this from me before, so it may sound like very repetitious, but my quiet street, you know, has sort of turned into a parking nightmare because the city refuses to enforce the health and safety code on density in an adjoining large apartment unit area. And so there's over renting, and there's no parking. There's one parking space there for anybody, and it's probably 8 people crashing. And so there's, all these trucks up and down my street. I see that with the accessory dwelling units, you're just going to compound the problem. Are you guys considering, who are doing the housing element, anything about using vacant mall land, not vacant, non-used parking spaces in malls during the evening, empty adjoining schools in the evening, and then giving the neighborhoods evening permit parking so that the streets can stay free of noise during the night. There may be a charge to this or something like that. You may have to work that out. Maybe landlords have to pay, maybe the neighbors have to pay, but it doesn't seem like this is part of the housing thought, and it's just going to be exacerbated, and it's not going to be ameliorated in the near future because of the pressures.
Thank you for that. And well, now that we have your comment, it will definitely be passed on to the housing element team for response. So it's kind of a shared parking idea between commercial and institutional and residential uses. So thank you for that. Yeah, Amy.
That's actually a very creative idea, and I like it because I spoke before about safety and livability, and really what I'm getting at is if you build a development for families and singles, okay, it's a community. And I know that it's more affordable to build blocks and they can be very sustainable and all that. But I urge that the city always consider the community that they're building. And a spinoff of that is, of course, safety in the streets. So all neighborhoods, every neighborhood that I can think of, maybe not in North San Rafael as much, but typically everywhere in San Rafael, there are too many cars. It's just not safe to walk, to ride, to even drive. And shoehorning in, tight developments could satisfy numbers, but it certainly isn't good for safety. So I like Mark's idea. I think that's great. We would like to think that people would take public transportation all the time, but I know for a fact, having taught at San Rafael High School, most of the kids are dropped off. There are cars in almost every family. So that's just the truth of the matter. Thank you.
Emma Ann on the iPad.
Oh, yes. Hi. I love all these ideas. I agree with a lot of the parking issues. I live on a street close to downtown, and it's obviously very difficult. People are jockeying for positions all the time. We have multiple dwellings in each home. But what I've also been more aware of since I've lived in San Rafael, I've been a renter for 20 years. I'm a school teacher. I have noticed it warming more and more. On hot days being warm, like my proximity that I live close to downtown, it's been warmer than, say, San Anselmo, which is in the valley. It's been warmer than Fairfax, which is in the valley. And I'm just wondering, as we get more and more dense, if there's any way to pay attention to living roofs or just some different ways of building that help. Our earth is already warming, but how can we cool as we're getting more and more dense? If there's not room for open spaces and planting trees and things like that, due to urban density, then, what are some different ways that we can work as a town to sort of, to cool the area? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And I know, like Amy's is such a great example by the highway. Like, I commute to Mill Valley for work, and I just love going by that roof. And just thinking, that could be heat, that if it wasn't alive, it would be heating, but it's, there's living plants on it, and it's cleaning and, being proactive and trying to, cool our environment. So, just paying attention to, as Susan said earlier, smarter building, using different materials, more sustainable materials, and, any way we can really work with our environmental issues instead of against them.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We're kind of coming to the end, so I'd like to have a minute to recap, but I don't want to cut off this. This is a great discussion with really good contributions, so I want to thank you. So is there, especially if anyone who hasn't spoken yet would like to, no pressure. No, any other?
Can I just say just ask one more thing about resources? I know that there are formulas for the amount of students that a certain amount of development or units would generate. There's formulas for that. Are there formulas for how much water would be needed for additional units? Are there formulas for how many more cars additional units will generate? And are those taken into consideration? Because as we know right now, water, we're in a dire water drought, and we don't have enough water to continue as we are, let alone adding more. And same with cars. I mean, has been brought up that the traffic is bad, and if you add 3,000 more units, how many more cars is that going to generate in San Rafael? So I think those are just resource infrastructure questions.
Right. So to answer your question, there are formulas for all of that. And as part of the housing element, regardless of those formulas, we have to figure out how we can accommodate our regional housing needs. So there is that balance, but I think that is a good point of we have this, and it obviously impacts other elements of the spectrum. So how is that taken into account? So
I think that there continues to be an impression that's pretty widely held that there's an inevitable unresolvable conflict between traffic and parking and increased density. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is that it's been proven that if you build a dense urban environment, it does two things. It actually creates a demand and an economic possibility of supporting mass transit. You cannot have successful mass transit without a certain amount of density. The SMART train right now doesn't look very smart because nobody's using it. It's because there's only a couple places along the line that have density that actually discourages people from having an automobile and encourages them to want to use mass transit. So if we are being honest with ourselves, we have to start thinking about the future as being more dense, and it's the only way it's going to work. And there is a conflict between equity, diversity, economic growth, and affordability. I'm not sure that there is a way to sustain our present formula of using cars to do everything, like dropping off your kids at school. And as a result, it's like you can say that that's an argument against density, about allowing density. But if we very properly locate the dense housing that we need in the old downtowns, in particular, then it's a virtuous cycle that begins, is that people are like, hey, there's nowhere to park. And oh, guess what? There's some mass transit we can use. There's bike lanes we can use. And they find affordable and sustainable alternatives. But if we never produce that level of density, None of those things will ever happen because we'll continue to have, a very suburban, prototypical town, and one that cannot
Yeah.
possibly sustain, mass transit, for example.
Charles, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, we are just about out of time. So we have folks transitioning back to this main room now, so we could do our report out. So actually, Leslie or Rachel, I think it is, I'm gonna ask you to stop sharing screen. Sorry to interrupt that conversation. It sounded like.
Yeah, sorry, it was a great conversation, so we ran over.
So thank you all again. I'm just gonna wait maybe 10 more seconds. I think we have folks still trickling back. And then we're gonna do a quick round robin report out just to make sure that we hear a bit about what each room spoke to and about. And then I'd like to respect your time and get you out of here very close to 8 o'clock, if not right at 8. So, okay, I think we now have everyone back here in the main room. Sorry about my lighting. It's the witching hour here and I'm fading into the background. So I'm going to go ahead and ask each one of the lead facilitators to do a very quick 1-minute capture of high-level key themes that you all spoke to. And just as a reminder, we're going to take all this great information you provided and put it in a summary so you can go there for more information. And with that, just for simplicity, I might just go right down the list, starting with you, Leslie, if you want to do a quick recap for us.
Yeah, thank you. We had a great conversation. The main issues with housing are affordability, accessibility, and accessibility to open space, accessibility to meaning transit, and to food sources, to schools. There is concern about the utilities and the services available to accommodate the housing, and this goes from water to parking and or having enough density to actually have the transit. There is, how do we make this housing walkable, bikeable, how to integrate areas such as the canal, and just some questions about, how does, when we do the housing element, how does that figure into the other aspects such as climate change? Are we encouraging sustainability to kind of adapt to our environment as we get more dense? So that I covered probably like a fraction of what we talked about, but kind of a overview. So.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. Yeah, and again, we'll definitely make sure that all of the great comments are captured in the summary. Great. So next, we're going to go to Alexis.
Great. And I'm also, it was a great conversation, and I'm just going to barely scratch the surface, but we had a lot of folks in our group who were concerned about lack of housing supply overall, lack of affordable housing in particular. And to that point, people were very interested in are there other funding streams that we can look at to make it easier to build affordable housing? Also, can we get rid of some of the requirements and extra steps for affordable housing developers that are costly and that take more time? Can we kind of streamline that process, in particular for affordable housing development? There were also great points made about the need to consider housing in relationship to physical and social infrastructure, and also the school districts and the impact that housing has on school districts. And so really looking at these issues together and interrelated and holistically. Also a final point that was brought up was just how realistic are the sites that have been presented. And so really wanting to make sure that given the need for housing and affordable housing, that we're really trying to pick sites that are viable and feasible for development. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much to my group.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexis. And last but not least, it would be great to hear from Walter and or Luis about your discussion.
Sure, I can go ahead. Well, like the other groups, our group had a big concern about the affordable housing and just trying to get the city and what developers to encourage them to make more affordable housing. Another point was brought up that like in the canal where you have a bunch of apartment units, there's a lot of overcrowding. So trying to make sure that in these new buildings and the current buildings that the city has to actually keep track of how many people are living there, because often overcrowding leads to a lot of the problems that the canal community is currently facing. Also, and again, just going back to overcrowding, trying to ensure that all the services that are going to be provided by these new buildings are there, especially parking, so we don't, again, create another type of environment where there is just so much overcrowding in general. And just try to work with the developers to ensure that low-income families have access to these new properties, and also encourage them to be able to work with people of low income, because often, as our group mentioned, even if you do want to like move into other areas, it's very difficult for you to like move out because of like high like costs to move into these buildings, but also just the general idea that like, oh, they may not be able to afford it. So I guess, and then I guess the last point would be in general of talking to like promoting these meetings to the larger community. Our group that was Spanish speaking thought that it knows that it's very important if we want to recruit other Spanish speakers to make communications in Spanish, as well as, and grateful for having like just Spanish in general for the meeting. And that's all for me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Walter. And again, thank you all for your time and patience and giving us all that fantastic input. Really, really important as we navigate this process. And we just have a couple more announcements just in terms of next steps, and then we definitely want to respect your time and send you on your way. So Barry, I'm going to hand it over to you to go over the slide.
Thanks, Dave. And I just want to highlight the first 3 bullets on the slide. So we do have a planning commission meeting on July 26th that's coming up. We'll be walking them through the sites. There'll be an opportunity for public comment at that meeting. We'll be having the same presentation at the City Council on August 1st. Again, we're going to be looking for comments from our council, but also from our community at that meeting. And we are planning another housing element workshop on August 16th. And that will also be at 6:30 on Zoom. And we're going to move from this conversation a step forward at that meeting toward policies and programs. So we'll be talking more there about some of the solutions that are possible and some of the things the city may do. The other things you see here on the list, the discussions, I would say watch the website. If you're not already familiar with sanrafaelhousing.org, please visit the site. It has a lot of information, and we'll be around through the end of this year and looking to bring this for adoption around January 2023. And thanks again for coming.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, great to see you all here this evening. As Barry mentioned, the website is again at the bottom of the screen at sanrafaelhousing.org to follow along and look for the summary from this meeting and updates on other events and deliverables. So thank you all again, and have a great evening. We hope to see you again soon. Take care all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.